Perfect. Well, let's get started now. So obviously thank you to everyone who's able to join today and view the webinar. Some of you may have joined previous ones. We've focused on some of the fraud statistics that we've seen and the trends for fraud as well. We're going over that again, but mainly with a focus on 2025 this year, or what's happened in 2025 so far this year. I know it's a really busy time for universities as well, so thank you for taking the time out. I know there's a lot of clearance planning and internal meetings and focus around the height of the admissions process and onboarding new students for the upcoming intake. So thank you for taking the time to join. As you can see, I'm not alone today. So there's also my colleague Rachel who's able to join. And for those that don't know me, I'm Phil. I'm the head of business solutions at Qualification Check. And then there's also Rachel here today as well.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Rachel Wales, head of global accounts. So responsible for account management, customer success, and work day to day with all of our university partners. Nice to have you all here.
In short, we've got 3 main points that we wanted to cover today. So we always want to go over the fraud because we know that's our bread and butter, and we know that's what people want to see. So we're going to look at the fraud trends so far in 2025 and things that we think are useful for you to know about based on not just the statistics, but also the reasons. We're also going to look a bit on the predictions for this year. So we've got the data up until June because that's the last full month. So we'll be looking at predictions for July and August as we step closer to the end of the intake. And then Rachel's going to take us through a couple case studies on the specific types of fraud that have been flagged on the QC platform so far this intake. So it's stuff to then look out for, and so you're aware of what we're seeing currently on our end as well. So in short, again, for those that aren't aware, so our bread and butter is primary source verifications, going back to the awarding body to then verify the information, verifying degree certificates and transcripts across 195 countries through 53,000 trusted sources in those countries. And that's how we're able to get the data that we're then going to show you today. It's always going back to the awarding body, confirming the information directly with them, and then finding out the reason for why it's come back as fraudulent. And that helps us put together the statistics and then the trends that we can identify. So to jump into it right away, what I wanted to start on is the fraud statistics looking at June last year in 2024 versus June this year, 2025. So the last full month that we've had so far, and quite a big month in terms of applications and verifications coming through the portal. So there's a few things that I want to point out on here. There's a couple countries where we've identified from June last year, it's decreased in terms of the fraudulent activity or the fraud statistic we've seen. India is probably the most notable one from June to June, where last year we saw 6.55, like it says there on the screen. But this year in June, it went down to 3.67, which is quite interesting. We know obviously India is a high risk market. Parts of India, certainly the northern regions of India, have always been classed as high risk, certainly by UKVI. So we wanted to understand a bit more about what has contributed to the decrease in the fraudulent activity from June to June. So what we've seen, if we're taking data that's outside of the platform as well, in general, visa refusals for Indian applications have gone down this year. And I think that's also being reflected in the data that we're seeing here in terms of fraudulent activity, certainly in June. So that's key to then take into that context that overall visa refusals are down. Now, what we also need to consider is India in the context of the UK higher education market. So India for the past few years has overtaken China in terms of the highest sending country for applications into the UK. And I think that's what we're also seeing here. So the percentage is just a representation of the total number of applications and verifications that we're seeing come through. And there are thousands and thousands that are coming through from India. But when I dove a little bit deeper into it, the individual number of cases of fraud that we're seeing in India is still the highest compared to the other countries. So the percentage is just representing the the total against the overall amount that we're seeing come through. But when we're looking at individual number of cases coming through, India is still technically the highest, whilst the percentage is still showing only at 3.67. So there's a couple things to then balance when we're looking at the data here. When we look at the two other greens, so those that have decreased from June to June, we've got the US and the UK in there. Now, again, diving a little bit deeper into both of them, certainly with the US, there are only small fluctuations in the data here, and there haven't been any major trends that have been identified that have changed from last year in June to this year in June 2025 to then say that there are external factors that have been impacting the fraudulent activity that we're seeing come through. Same thing for the UK, although that's something that we'll monitor as well. It's about a percent that's decreased in terms of fraudulent activity. We are seeing slightly more, slightly more cases of no student records being found for UK qualifications. So more work will need to be done so we can assess it over the rest of the intake when we look at July and August as well. But no major trends that we're seeing across the US that have affected that decrease. Now, in terms of the ones that have increased, that might tell more of an interesting story. So Ghana has pretty much tripled from year on year when we're looking at the June data, from 2.8 last year to 6.38 this year. Now, again, diving a little bit more deeper into the reasons behind it, and that's something I'm going to show on some of the later slides. What we have seen is specifically in Ghana, there's an increased number of cases where specifically the response of no student records being found or incomplete studies at that particular institution in Ghana, though those cases have gone up. And that seems to be contributing to the fraud statistics in June so far this year. So that's something that we're going to continue to monitor, because we're expecting to see that same type of response of incomplete studies or no student records appearing again in the cases that we see over July and August. Bangladesh is another one that I want to point out. Now, slightly different here, because in last year in June, we hadn't uncovered any fraudulent activity in Bangladesh, but this year in June we have done it. It's gone up to 7.52, so that's one of the highest there out of these 9 countries. And as I've looked at this, that June last year seems to be an anomaly, and we'll see that on the next slide when we move over to understand what July and August looked like last year as well. And June does seem to be just an anomaly here, because June this year has gone up quite a bit. So if we flick over to July and August, and what we're going to do is show this alongside the predictions as well. You can see, starting with Bangladesh at the bottom, July there was 7% in Bangladesh, and then 5% in August as well. So that June number is an anomaly for that reason, because it's in line with the average fraud response that we saw across 2024. I believe in Bangladesh last year it was about 6.6%, and so far this year in 2025 the average is 6.1. So again, that June number was an anomaly, because we're seeing more months that look like 7 and 5% in Bangladesh. It's also important to note that of all these 9 countries, we've picked them because, one, it's a mixture of high risk countries and also countries where there's particular trends. But each of these countries have a minimum of 500 cases that we've seen come through so far this year. So we've got enough data to then be able to tell you these trends and feel comfortable about the trends that we are sharing. So the predictions, and this is obviously, take it with a pinch of salt. This is using the data that we saw in January last year and then July and August last year, in how things may have increased or decreased over the course of the intake. Things may be slightly different, but this is what we're looking at based on that data. And the key ones I want to point out are India. Now, again, on the previous slide, we saw that June was at 6.5, and then it dropped down to and then June in 2024 was 6.5. June in this year was 3.6. What we're predicting here is that July and August will also stay relatively the same at 3.7 and across the 2 months. The reason for that prediction is that, extrapolating data outside of the June to August months that we've got here, since March, the fraud rate has stayed or fluctuated between 3 and 4%. So I'm expecting that to stay the same, certainly until the end of August, and then we'll see what happens after that. With Ghana, obviously I touched on before that there was the increase in the number of students that haven't completed their studies, or those that have no record of their studies at the institution. So I'm expecting that to continue throughout July and August as well. And as I touched on before, it's something that's top of mind and that we want to constantly be reviewing. So I expect that to stay high and continue to grow a little bit as we go into July and August. And then Bangladesh as well. Obviously, that one's a little bit tougher to predict because of the anomaly in July. Now, using the averages, and we know that the average is 6.1 across 2025 so far, we're assuming a very similar rate to what we saw last year in 2024. Obviously, that can still fluctuate, but there aren't any specific fraud-related trends that we're seeing in Bangladesh that might point us in a direction to say there's going to be a massive increase here. It will just be the typical fraud responses that we're seeing at the moment. But again, that's something for us to monitor and see, and it's the same across all of these markets as well. Just something to be aware of, that these fraud trends can jump up or go down at any given moment. May also depend on the month and the time of year when applicants are applying for postgraduate or UG studies as well. Things to consider internally when you're looking at the data. So, in terms of the common types of fraud, the same as last year, or what we reported earlier in the year, forged documents make up 40% of what we're seeing come through. And when I break it down by country, every single one of those has an instance of forged documents being shown. This is the terminology that's used by the awarding bodies in each of the countries and by the institutions. So it's taking that and showing how that makes up the total percentage of all the common types of fraud that we're seeing. No student records has increased last year. It was about 20 to 25%. Now the lack of student records has gone up to 34%, and that's what we're seeing across markets like Ghana and a few others that I'll identify as well. And then you're seeing a few others that are popping up around mismatched data and incorrect grades and incomplete studies. Mismatched data can mean a lot of different things. It can be that, for instance, the index number or the serial number of a particular student doesn't match the person that submitted the qualification in there. So it's a nod towards perhaps checking the identification of an individual, but it's specifically that maybe certain students, and it's a trend in China, certain students are using index numbers of genuine students that have studied there and have achieved the grade and that hit the requisite level in order to apply for a postgraduate course at your institution. They're using that data to then gain entry. So it's, again, bits to look out for. Incorrect grade makes up for a small percentage of that, but then it might be mixed into a few of the others, because a forged document is forged in its entirety, but would also include incorrect grades. The incorrect grade percentage is specifically those that have changed the grade itself, but the document or the transcript and the degree certificate could still be legitimate, just the change in the grade. So if we break it down into the countries, we've got Ghana and Nigeria. That's what we're starting with here. And you can see that 55% of the documents in Ghana are forged, and 35% of them are records not being found. That's up quite significantly in Ghana for what we're seeing. It's records not being found alongside incomplete data as well. So those are the two that make up the 35%. And you've got the 10% of incorrect grades. Nigeria, more of a focus on documents just not being issued entirely there, and that makes up 80+% of the activity that we're seeing come back from the awarding bodies and from applicants attempting to gain entry into postgraduate studies primarily. Then again, if we're looking at India, 76%, almost 3/4 are forged documents, but then we're seeing no records found in incomplete studies. When reported earlier in the year, there were less cases of incomplete studies. It's a smaller proportion of what we are seeing in India, but that's something that's crept up. So again, something to look out for on that side. And China's got the most varying amount of reasons that we're seeing come through. It is the highest percentage, I believe, of incorrect grades that we're seeing come through. So that might tie in with certain requirements at institutions per program or per course. So again, something to look out for when you're seeing some of those transcripts and degree certificates coming through. And then that mixture of no records being found and forged documents as well. And then we move on to Pakistan and Bangladesh. Both of these you can see heavy weighting towards forged documents. So that's the entirety of the document being embellished and being amended. Now we know certainly in Pakistan that for different courses and over certain decades there might be changes to the borders of degree certificates and transcripts, which probably feeds into why we're seeing a lot of forged documents. With the frequency and the changes of the documents in Pakistan, that's going to constantly affect what we see in terms of forged documents coming forwards from applicants who've applied with Pakistani qualifications. We can make the same assumption in Bangladesh as well, given the high rate of forged documents that we're seeing come through, plus incomplete studies. And then the last three, so we've got US and Canada, and then the UK after this as well. No records being found in the US. Same thing, 72% in the US, 61% in Canada. No surprises really in Canada. The key metric or the key trend that we'd identified last year and then still into this year as well is the OSSDs, the Ontario Secondary School Diplomas. That's what leads to a high number of no records being found, in part also because some of those institutions don't exist. So that's what's going to contribute to that. Mismatched data in Canada specifically would relate to the need for a national ID. So every single applicant that comes from abroad that goes to Canada to study requires a national ID, or is issued with a national ID as part of their visa. So they should be able to present that as part of the verification procedure. We're seeing some of those miss that out or skip that process, and that's being deemed as fraudulent activity because it's something everyone has to hand. And then finally, the reasons for fraud in the UK, no records being found. It makes up the majority there, so 89% of those cases coming through can be attributed to that. Now, again, this is something that we will probably be able to present in more detail when it comes to the end of the intake, and we'll do that around October time, where we can look into perhaps more about the demographic that's contributing to the trends here in the UK. We've done that exercise in the US and Canada, and that's helped us understand that. But in the UK, we might need a bit more work. I can see there's a comment as well about no records being found and forged documents. No records being found is when we're looking at databases and accessing those, or when we've integrated with student record systems, matching against those, there's no records that are being found on that piece in there. So it could be certain bits of data that mean that that's not being found. The grade isn't matching on that side, or maybe perhaps the name isn't on there. So that's the distinction there with records not being found. A forged document, as I said before, with Pakistan and Bangladesh, is going to be where I guess the change entirety of the degree certificate and the transcript. So everything from the borders and the shading to the data to the signatures that you see on there, that will be the forged document. As part of our process, we're always asking for a degree certificate and transcript to be uploaded and then shared with the awarding body to be verified. So that forged document is specifically referring to the changes in the borders and the shading, perhaps the lack of the signature from the appropriate person on the degree certificate or the transcript, all the changes to the document that you may have seen that may be easy to do on AI. And then the last bit from my side is the fraud hotspots by country. We shared this earlier in the year as well. The trends that we're seeing at the moment still highlight the same states, the same country, same regions within those countries as well. And it tends to be where some of the more prestigious institutions are, or some of the more popular universities are within those countries. So that's what we've been able to identify on this side. So the next bit is where Rachel's going to dive into some of the specific cases of fraud that we've seen.
I can do. Very quickly though, Phil, before I do, there was one more question in the comments to round off your pieces, asking if you could explain the degree not issued percentage on the reasons for fraud pie charts.
Yes, so degree not issued might cover on some of the other pieces as well. When you're looking at no records being found, it comes down ultimately to the way the verification has happened. So if we're able to access a database or a student record system that we've integrated with, that will be no record found when we're trying to pull back the data on that side. If it's a degree not being issued, again, it's the vocabulary, it's the lexicon used by the awarding body to then say that this is not something that they've issued. So they're stepping away from that piece.
Great, thanks, Phil. So before I go into the cases we've seen, I just want to note that I won't be naming individual institutions. However, if anybody did want to discuss them in more detail, I'm more than happy to do so separately. I'm going to focus on 2 cases involving forged documentation, an area where we're all seeing increasingly sophisticated fraud. I was speaking with a partner recently who called the days of Tipex and photocopiers, which made your jobs a bit easier at spotting fake documents. In contrast, we're now all dealing with much more advanced techniques, including AI-generated forgeries, which are significantly harder to spot at face value. And the cases are also both based in India. So moving on to the first case, this comes from the Punjab region, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and involves a technical university where we uncovered a coordinated document fraud scheme combined with the use of QR codes. We became aware of the issue when multiple applicants were identified submitting documents that were nearly identical. It was just the applicant's name that was changed, and this raised obvious red flags and triggered an investigation by our team. What we found was significant. A large-scale spammer group had created a counterfeit website, issuing thousands of fake degrees in the name of the university. And these documents were designed to be highly legitimate and included QR codes that linked to a very good fake verification database that mimicked the look and feel of the official one identically. So it was really hard to spot. We escalated our findings to the university's controller of examinations and senior staff, who confirmed that the documents were indeed fraudulent. And to validate the full extent of the issue, we actually carried out an in-person visit. We went to go and see the university and speak to them in person to find out exactly what was happening and what we could do about it. But unfortunately, despite numerous attempts to engage with them further, it became clear that they weren't cooperating adequately, nor were they in a position to implement the necessary safeguards that we felt were necessary or needed for us to confidently be able to verify qualifications with them moving forward. So given these risks and the lack of confidence, we made the decision to remove them from our portal and has ceased processing checks for them at this time. In the meantime, what can you and your teams, I guess, be doing to help mitigate against this type of fraud? What would we recommend? Well, one is don't check documents in isolation. Fraud often becomes obvious when patterns start emerging, or as many of our partners report, with a bit of luck and gut instinct, which can't always be relied upon. So one-off checks may appear legitimate, but reviewing multiple applications side by side, you can uncover suspicious similarities. Coordination across your teams and time periods is also essential. Be aware of those scammers that try and submit late in the cycle as well, in the hope that you're not going to be so vigilant due to time pressures. The second thing I would say is be cautious of QR codes. So fraudsters are increasingly embedding QR codes that link to very good fake verification portals, which are designed to look authentic. So never assume that a QR code is legitimate without validating with the primary source first. Just check with them that this is completely legitimate. And on that, try and prioritize primary source verification where you can. Relying solely on document inspection is no longer enough. And primary source verification, i.e. going directly to the awarding institution, should be a standard, especially in high-risk regions. If we move on to the second case, this involves a public university in Haryana where a pattern of suspicious verification requests were identified. And whilst the signs this time were less obvious than the first, i.e. it wasn't just a name change, a comparison across multiple submissions revealed concerning similarities. And interestingly, a very high percentage of them were linked to a specific partner of ours, or university partner of ours, and were coming from one particular channel, which suggested that fraudsters may have been deliberately trying to target them. So what we did again was we launched a detailed investigation, worked closely with our contacts at the awarding institution. The outcome confirmed that the documents in question were indeed fraudulent. And during our conversations, it was suggested that internal personnel were involved in the unauthorised issuance of fake certificates. However, unlike the first case, the senior staff at that institution were cooperative throughout the investigation. And as a result, we are confident that a reliable verification process is in place with them, and that we can continue to carry out checks to support applicants with genuine qualifications. It just means that we've got a much more manual process in place with them. It takes a little bit longer, but we're absolutely confident in the results that we're getting back. So again, for this case, what can you guys be doing in this sort of situation? And again, I would suggest look for patterns across submissions. So a bit like in the first case, no single document stood out, but viewed together, the subtle consistencies basically made it easier to pick up. Be alert to clustering from specific sources. So a high volume of questionable documents linked to one institution or one agent can indicate targeted fraud. So escalate patterns, not just individual cases. I would also say don't assume legitimacy based on the institution alone. And you touched on it earlier, Phil, that even well-regarded universities can be exploited, especially when internal personnel are compromised. So always try and verify directly with trusted and verified contacts within those particular institutions where you can. So they're the two cases. Phil, and back to you if there's any questions.
Yes, it's also worth noting that some of the easiest degrees and transcripts to forge are exactly as you said, Rachel, from those prestigious institutions. You can just Google it, and there's websites that I guess they don't explicitly mention that they're fake qualifications, but they use them as novelty degrees and novelty transcripts that they can sell them as those. And when you search them up, it always tends to be some of the more popular, the more prestigious institutions that are available there to download. So again, something else that's worth looking into and being aware of when you're seeing documents come through. But the last piece is just the QR code. So obviously we're hosting these webinars and events throughout the year. So if you want to attend the next one or be kept up to date as to when the next one is happening, feel free to scan the QR code, and then there'll just be a form that you can complete. It should be super quick and easy, and then we let you know when the next event is happening. If there are any questions, do post them into the chat now. I can see there is one at the moment. I can see one about being curious about other AI tools being used to detect fraud. Now that's really interesting. We'd taken a look at that piece as well as to how could we use AI to help detect against fraud, not just degree fraud, but there's lots of other types of fraud that apply to that can be applied within the admissions process. One of the challenges that we had seen is false positives. Now, from certain demographics, degree certificates and transcripts can be uploaded as scanned copies, and a scanned copy could have a lot of, well, would come back as a false positive. There might be blurring on there, or there might be smudges on that document. It's not necessarily fake or forged, but it will come back as a false positive because it's a scanned copy. So there are limitations to it at the moment, but it's something that I think everyone is constantly looking at as to how that can develop to then further support the detection of fraud in the future. But for now, there's still some challenges around using AI to support that. So I think we've got about 30 seconds or so left. So if there are any questions, then do let us know. Otherwise, you feel free to reach out to Rachel and myself if you have any other questions. If you want to know a bit more about the case studies that Rachel took us through earlier, feel free to reach out to us. If not, we are planning to host the next event at the end of this intake around the middle of October, I believe. But we'll keep you posted on those dates.
Don't think we seem to have any questions coming through.
We'll end it there.
Oh,
thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thanks all.